This is Barkha Dutt. You're watching the Mojo Story. Our focus remains on the only issue that matters before this country today, the COVID catastrophe. And it is a catastrophe. It's an unprecedented humanitarian crisis of the kind that this country has never witnessed before. At least in my adult memory as a journalist, I have never seen anything like it. There is not a home, not a friend, not an acquaintance I do not know who has not grappled with the second wave in some way. We all have tales of personal bereavement. Many of you in the audience know about me losing my father to COVID this past week. So why am I still here? I am still here because right now, this is not just my tragedy or yours. This is the tragedy of a collective, a country that needs to come together and yet, oddly, is a country that is still divided. People are helping each other. People are turning to each other on online networks. But most people I meet, like one man told me at a cremation ground, feel that they've been left to fend for themselves. एक आदमी ने मुझे शमशान घाट पे बोला जिसके भाई की हत्या हो गई थी, हम तो जी अब भगवान भरोसे हैं. And yet, what is the messaging coming out of the government? We still continue to see politics and noise around politics. We see the center and the state squabbling over oxygen in courts as people die on the streets at the doors of shut hospitals. We see foreign aid having arrived on the 25th of April and 7 days being taken to even put an SOP in place for its distribution. And we see the Delhi courts finally telling the central government today, you may be blind, but we are not. This after controversial statements by law officers claiming that the statements around deaths mounting in Delhi are rhetorical statements. Through all of this, the IPL, that grotesque immorality, has finally been halted. But the Central Vista Project has not. It continues to be regarded as an essential service, and laborers continue to work at the heart of the capital where COVID is ravaging through the streets and the heart of this capital city and this country. As we look at the weird messaging emerging out of the government and why it seems to be tone deaf in so many ways in the handling of this pandemic, let's first bring you from on the ground a set of images that may make you want to turn away. It made me want to turn away while I was reporting this story, but please do not. This is the story of one day in the life of a COVID hospital and the desolation the Indians who are feeling orphaned by the Indian state are feeling outside hospitals and cremation grounds every single day. A son who has just lost his mother. A husband whose wife died minutes ago. A mother-in-law grieving for her daughter-in-law taken away by COVID in her 20s. There are tears of pain, but there is also rage and there is growing fury.
हॉस्पिटल ना आए, अपने घर में बैठे रहे बस। यहाँ के मारने के लिए हॉस्पिटल बिल्कुल भी ना आए। हॉस्पिटल में कोई भी इलाज नहीं है। जो अपने आप बच रहा है, अपनी किस्मत से बच रहा है, बस वही जी रहा है, अदरवाइज सब मर के जा रहे हैं यहाँ से।
The poor of India say they've been left alone to fend for themselves at the doors of hospitals, too crowded, too overrun to make space for them. There are 500 beds in the Ambedkar Hospital in the national capital treating COVID patients. They were ordered to add another 400 on the 20th of April by the Delhi government. It is still not enough.
14 घंटे हो गए उसको ऑक्सीजन नहीं लगाया, 14 घंटे के अंदर ऑक्सीजन नहीं लगा तो 14 घंटे तो कल ने बिताए बैठ के।
Outside, desperate families plead for beds, for doctors, for oxygen, just any help, any person to talk to. As ambulances load bodies, 2 to a van, sometimes 4. To come here is to confront the human beings behind the data, the loneliness of their grief, the anger at having been treated as orphans of the state. There is no one even to talk to these men and women, leave alone to guide them. This man, Ram Nivas, has just been told minutes ago that his wife didn't survive. His tears turn to anger, and with no one else to engage with him or talk to him, he lashes out at the hospital.
10 बजे आए हाँ 10 बजे के बाद मैं इनके हाथ जोड़े पैर पकड़े सिर भी रखा मैंने डॉक्टरों से कहा इसे एक गोली दे दो लेकिन उन्होंने एक बार नज़र भरकर उसे देखा भी नहीं और अब जो है फॉर्मेलिटी जब मर गई फॉर्मेलिटी पूरी करने के लिए जो डॉक्टर्स लगे पड़े सारे डॉक्टर जो है आप कहाँ से आ गए हो डॉक्टर जो जब से जो 10 बजे से एक गोली तक नहीं दी गई कभी कहे उसके पास जाओ कभी कहे उसके पास जाओ कभी कहे उसके पास जाओ यार एक गोली तक नहीं दी उसने वो बेचारी मर गई अब जो मेरी बीवी मर गई
अरे भैया हमारी मिला का कहू नहीं कदर की ना अरे 4-5 जगह लेके गए
In another corner, Savitri, a homemaker, has to call the family and let them know that Vimla, her daughter-in-law, only in her 20s, has not made it. She went hunting from hospital to hospital till she came here. Who cares for the poor? Who cares for the poor? Who cares for the poor? Is the only thing she keeps repeating.
हमारा बहुरिया है सवेरे लेके आए कहीं कोरोना नहीं ना भेज दिन इधर कौन हॉस्पिटल ला वहाँ लेके गए वहाँ चेकअप कहीं कोरोना है वहाँ से भेज दिन वहाँ मेहर जमुना पार कहीं वहाँ ले जाओ वहाँ बेड खाली है वहाँ लेके गए वहाँ कहीं ना बेड खाली ना डॉक्टर ना को नहीं अरे भैया फिर लेके अंदर यहाँ लेके आन भर्ती किन तोरे घर आराम रहा सिलेंडर हटा देन दिखाओ खातिर लगा देन ऑक्सीजन लगायन सबको बाहर निकाल देन ऑक्सीजन हटा देन मरीज मर गया कहीं जाओ लेके
Health workers in hospitals in India are overstretched. They are short of everything, of staff, of beds, of drugs, of nurses, and above all, of oxygen. More than one senior medic has broken down in tears.
We have young patients who will die in the matter of 2 hours. I request you, please send oxygen to us. We need oxygen for our patients. Please send oxygen to us. Please don't harass our patients. They will die. They need oxygen. We can save them.
We have to literally manage patients at home with oxygen. And this is not something we are enjoying. So I really want all of you to follow a few things that I really am requesting you to follow. First, आप लोग प्लीज सेफ रहो. अगर आपको लग रहा है कि आपको 1 साल से कोरोना नहीं हुआ है इसलिए आप कोई सुपर हीरो हो या आपकी इम्यूनिटी बहुत अच्छी है और आपको ऐसे कुछ नहीं होगा तो आप गलत फहमी में हो. हम यंग लोगों को देख रहे हैं. I mean, we have a 35-year-old who's on the ventilator and we are not able to help people now. So we really don't want any of you to be in that situation.
But as hospitals put up notices like this one saying no oxygen available and shut their gates at emergency wards, among ordinary people, the unfortunate and easy target remains the health system.
हॉस्पिटल ना आए अपने घर में बैठे रहे बस.
यहाँ के मारने के लिए
हॉस्पिटल बिल्कुल भी ना आए. हॉस्पिटल में कोई भी इलाज नहीं है. जो अपने आप बच रहा है अपनी किस्मत से बच रहा है बस वही जी रहा है. अदरवाइज सब मर के जा रहे हैं यहाँ से.
The collapsing health system where helpless grieving families lash out at equally helpless exhausted health workers is made worse by the fact that families are having to sign consent forms that say if those they love die because there is not enough oxygen or because the hospital did not have a ventilator, it would be no one's fault. 21-year-old Jatin had to do exactly that. His father died soon after. In some way, these forms are like 2021's versions of a modern day death warrant.
ऐसे साइन करवाया है कि यहाँ से शिफ्ट कर लीजिए, यहाँ पे आईसीयू बेड नहीं है, अगर हमारे कुछ हो गया तो हमारी जिम्मेदारी नहीं है।
तो 21 पे आपको इतना बड़ा फैसला लेना पड़ा कि आपको इस तरह का कंसेंट फॉर्म साइन करना पड़ा।
यस मैम, क्या कर सकते हैं मैम, बताओ।
The hours roll on. Those who cannot get any hospital help have now started turning to non-medical options, like this Gurdwara in a satellite town of Delhi that offers an oxygen langar. Temporary intervention with cylinders placed at the main road of its premises. The explosion of anxiety and desperation here is frightening.
ऑक्सीमीटर तो भैया जल्दी से ऑक्सीमीटर तो डॉक्टर साहब ऑक्सीमीटर तो ऑक्सीमीटर
आ गए भैया, आ रहे लेके आ
Back at the hospital, as night falls, the ambulances are stacking up one after the other, but the hospital is still full up. At the back of one ambulance is Rajkumari, in her 50s, gasping for breath. Her son Rahul has been on the street since 9 a.m. That's almost 12 hours now, and no hospital has let them in. Do you remember which all hospitals you've gone to?
RML, LNJP, Safdarganj, and GB Pant.
What do they say?
There is no ICU bed in hospital, in any of the hospitals.
How many hours have you been on the road?
It's been since morning, 9 o'clock since morning. We are roaming here and there.
And what's your mother's age?
It's 53.
The crisis is that the ambulance has just one oxygen cylinder and it does not have the operational capacity for a full day, so it must be turned off every few hours. Rahul is worried. He asks us, where does he take her now? We have no answer. As we leave, we meet Savitri ji. She is walking from ambulance to ambulance, begging the drivers, can someone help her take her daughter-in-law's body home? There is no space for the living, and now there is no space even for the dead.
या जिससे से पूछो वो कहते हैं मैं नहीं जाऊंगा, ये बॉडी जिंदा आदमी लाते हैं, मुर्दा नहीं उठाते हैं, मुर्दा नहीं उठाते हैं.
No space for the living, no space for the dead, and yet we are arguing in court over oxygen. We are talking about whether the IPL should go on, and we are seeing pictures out of Uttar Pradesh that are still talking about the counting of votes. So this godforsaken IPL has finally been suspended, and not too late. It should have happened a lot earlier. That bubble has burst. That's no moral position. Some players have been infected. So the games have been suspended indefinitely. But guess what? Through all of this, the center and the states are still squabbling about oxygen supply in court. And today the Delhi court has had to tell the center that you may be blind, but we are not blind. We are seeing what's happening on the streets of India's cities. In the meantime, if I were to show you these images from Uttar Pradesh, let's bring them up. This hasn't stopped. This absolute craziness in our country hasn't stopped. And guess what else hasn't stopped? Files moving on the movement of the Central Vista Project, where the Prime Minister and the Vice President should leave. And even when we contemplate a national lockdown, we are still talking about the construction of that particular revamping of Delhi's heart, even as Delhi's soul is ravaged, as an essential activity. Let's come out of these pictures now and introduce our guest today as we look at the Modi government's absolutely bizarre sort of messaging through this crisis. Rahul Ram, who's a musician and a satirist, political commentator, joins us. Sandip Ghose, senior journalist and commentator. Madhavan Narayanan, senior journalist and commentator. We have Rajeev, Suri, who attempted a petition against the Central Vista Project without any luck in the Supreme Court. Patralekha, one of our best-known health journalists, is with us. Dr. Rama, one of our foremost public health professionals, is with us as well. And I just want to make it clear, I'll start with you, Rama. People are not dying per se from COVID. They are dying more from the lack of oxygen right now, more from the lack of access to medical treatment. You now actually have a Government of India advisory that is interfering with how doctors should treat their patients. For example, high flow cannulas are ill-advised against. Government of India bureaucrats are telling doctors what SPO levels to maintain in oxygen. I personally know this because my father, when I lost him, but when we were treating him at Vedanta, he was very claustrophobic and he could not wear a mask. He would keep throwing it off. So the doctors had to place a high flow cannula. And as per the government's current advisory, elderly people like my father should not be getting the comfort of that cannula because it consumes more oxygen. So we are now directly as a failure of the government to provide basic infrastructure to our health workers, interfering with how doctors should be treating their patients. In my opinion, this is nothing but criminal incompetence. And yet our conversations continue to be about whose fault it is, what the SOP should be, how many days it will take for the oxygen concentrators that are lying at airports for the last 7 days. As a public health professional, you must be absolutely horrified.
It is horrific. It's not only horrific, it is criminal negligence and a complete callousness on the part of the government. I think to have not anticipated that there will be a wave and a very severe wave, especially in the context of mutants, and with warnings from the scientists themselves, just went unheeded. And I think this really, the responsibility lies with the highest levels of power, especially the Prime Minister's office and the Niti Aayog with Vinod Paul as its leader. None of these people had made any preparations. In fact, the slogan was, we have beaten COVID. COVID is not going to come back to this country. So this complete disdain for scientific debate and data that was staring at us in our face is actually amounting to criminal negligence. It is also what has resulted is a carnage. How can we live this down? What kind of moral fiber is left in the hearts and the minds of this political class? You just don't give a damn. And the numbers are not small, Barkha. The suffering is not small. It is a horrible situation. And we are all left to fend for ourselves. Is this what we really anticipated ever in our lives? Like you rightly said, in our adult life, did we ever think? And don't forget, this entire COVID was used to build the Prime Minister's image. What was all that vaccine Maitri about? What was all of that about? And so you became the global hero. And what are you? You're an emperor without clothes today, with a coterie who is saying, oh man, you've got the finery on you. I'm appalled. I'm disgusted.
Yeah. Rama was saying that it's like the emperor without clothes. Remember, the Prime Minister's face is on those vaccine certificates. And now, Sandip, you have been arguing for the Prime Minister to take charge of the narrative, but actually something very different is happening here. With the Prime Minister's face on those vaccine certificates, people are also going to ask him to take responsibility for the absolute shambolic rollout. If you look at the data now, we're at 17 lakh vaccinations. Is the lowest actually at a time when we seem to be the highest. By making this about himself, by putting his photograph on those certificates, right? Isn't the flip side now that he needs to step up and take moral responsibility? Sandeep?
Irrespective of the certificate and the photographs, Barkha, I think he cannot get away from taking the moral responsibility as the chief executive of the country. And it has always been a personalized style of governance, and it all begins and ends with Modi. He has never shied away from doing that. So whether he put his picture on the certificate or not, I think the buck begins and stops with him. I think there is no denying that. And if somebody is not accepting that or living in denial, I think I can't comment what is the kind of political or personal wisdom somebody is doing. So it's obviously hitting, what I'm surprised is, I've been with you on these COVID programs for the last couple of weeks. Every time we think next week it'll be better, but nobody seems to have a clue. He's not here on our show just now, Saket Tikku, whom we have had several times. And the impression you tend to get every time that, okay, we are getting past this oxygen problem. And it's just getting worse.
If you remember, once we discussed here when they were talking about shifting oxygen from one region to the other, I think Patro was also there, and we asked that, what happens if those areas which are today surplus, they become deficient tomorrow? And that's precisely what's happening today. You have Bangalore gasping for breath.
Yeah.
And 2 days ago, so this is going to be a scenario all over the country. Now, whether you call it logistics, whether you call it, and the contradictory statement, you talk to Harshvardhan, or hear him, I don't talk to him, he'll say that there is no oxygen shortage in the country.
But they're lying to the country, right? Sandeep, it's a lie, right? When Tushar Mehta tells the Supreme Court of India that there is no oxygen deficit and 12 people die in Batra hospital 2 days later, another 24 die in Karnataka 1 day later. Today there are deaths coming in from Mysore. They're all related to oxygen shortage. This is the same man who in 2020 told the Supreme Court there were no migrants on the road as I was walking with them physically on the highways of India. So why would this government lie to the people of this country? And
I think
that's
total loss of credibility. It's it's oxygen everywhere, but not a drop to breathe is the kind of situation we have in that, and that credibility is gone. And what again, somebody who is familiar with logistics and everything, and I have tweeted this twice. That there are companies, firms like Mahindra Logistics, which which specializes in monitoring in movement. They have a cloud-based control center, and they can really do that sort of monitoring. I don't know what is happening. Oxygen is not a matter of bureaucrats sitting with files and Excel sheets and allocating quota for people. Somebody pushes and Viman's quota, I've increased from 350 to 420. That's not how it's handled, this kind of a supply chain. There is a scientific methodology. Today, the world has moved forward. So it's totally clueless. And as the worst part is what you're hearing, each of these stories, that can happen, not only can happen, has happened to people like you and me and people we know. It's become a great equalizer. And doesn't discriminate between any strata of society, or even government people are equally helpless. People who are in high position in government, they can't
what is happening? Rama, you spoke about Vinod Paul at the Niti Aayog, you spoke about the Prime Minister's office, you spoke about the advice of scientists having been ignored. The fact of the matter is that we did not even order enough vaccines, and 2 months could have made the critical difference between the carnage we're seeing on the streets and lives saved. 2 months. Everything that they've done now, they did not let Maharashtra inoculate door to door. They did not give Maharashtra more vaccines when Maharashtra asked for them. They over-centralized the system. They got hung up on nationalism, on a made in India vaccine. Right now, Pfizer is finally offering help, and we're taking it. But earlier, we put them through the hoops to get clearances. If you had to say that, where for you does the accountability rest? And do you believe that in the middle of the pandemic is when heads must roll? Or do you believe that we first must wait to save lives and then have that conversation?
There is no saving lives, Barkha. The point really is none of them. I want to really name Harshvardhan and Vinod Paul. They are both clinicians. They have both taken a Hippocratic oath, and they have a moral responsibility as clinicians as well as advisors to the government and a political figure. It is appalling. Not one of them has come forward to say that, we have failed. What's wrong in saying we have failed? And who's going to roll their heads? Nobody is going to roll their heads. They're not stepping down. The Prime Minister is not squeaking. I mean, what kind of a, scientific community and credibility do we have left? It's appalling. I cannot believe what has happened in this country. And, no scientist, no public health person is even included in the discussion. The PMO is opaque. God knows who is taking decisions within that PMO, who is informing whom. And in fact, the information from some of the groups of immunologists was conveyed to Vinod Paul. Did Vinod Paul convey it to Modi or not? We don't know. And this is in the public domain. It's not something I am sort of, heard from someone. A Reuters report has, in fact, looked at this issue and said the flow of information was conveyed to Vinod Paul, and Vinod Paul, for all practical purposes, is so-called the technical head.
Yeah.
He's a pediatrician by training. He doesn't have any public health people around him, or, there are enough in this country. I'm talking about clinicians who are public health people. I mean, this is absolutely unacceptable. There is no moral responsibility left in the minds and hearts of these people.
Yeah, I agree, and all we're seeing is films made on drone cameras of so-called oxygen express trains, as if there's some modern version of the bullet train. This is what Piyush Goyal released on his Twitter feed. But you talk to people outside of hospitals, and this oxygen is not reaching where it's meant to. And every day we are losing 12 lives, 20 lives, 25 lives at hospitals because there is no oxygen. Rahul, in the middle of all this, we have had media reports that tell us that the Central Vista Project is considered an essential activity. Politicians can be insensitive, politicians can be daft, but the Central Vista Project, I mean, yes, nobody would have cared about the Central Vista Project if we were all vaccinated. But the fact is that our vaccinations are at about 17 lakhs. They're the lowest that they've been since the kickoff, at a time when the program was meant to be universalized. Rahul?
Well, all I can say is it's, मुझे गाली देने की इच्छा करती है, मैं क्या करूं, मैं प्रोग्राम पे नहीं दूंगा, मगर आप ये सोचो कि कोई मतलब दिल ही नहीं है किसी आदमी का जो कह सकता है कि सेंट्रल विस्टा प्रोजेक्ट ना एसेंशियल है इस टाइम पे। अरे रोक देना यार कुछ महीने के लिए, क्या खत्म हो जाएगा, बाद में कर लीजिए, अभी करने की क्या जरूरत है? एसेंशियल कैसे बन गया यार? ये हॉस्पिटल थोड़ा ना बन रहा है, ये तो घर बना रहे हैं बड़े बड़े मिनिस्टरों के लिए। छोड़ो ना, अपने घर के लिए उसने कर दिया कि भैया ये है डेडलाइन। They have time to do this rubbish, but has the PM visited a hospital? No. And this Harshvardhan, he should just resign. I mean, he's the most useless piece of junk that you will find masquerading as a human being. I mean, what is this? He lies. He's there, coronil kar raha hai. Kya hai ye aadmi? How can a health minister be called Jordan, the health minister resigned because 5 patients died. Can you even imagine Harshvardhan doing that? No. Can you imagine his party people asking him to resign? No. Can you imagine his boss asking him to resign? No. You know why Harshvardhan will not resign? Because if he's asked to resign, then in short order his boss will be asked to resign, owning moral responsibility. That is why nobody is going to ask anybody to resign up there. Secondly, science has been thrown out of the window by these guys. They don't believe in science because all through they've been rubbishing science. They've been pushing some, ancient science, ancient wisdom. That वो उपनिषद में लिखा है कोरोना, क्या बकवास कर रहे हो तुम लोग यार? And the WhatsApp groups are full of people saying, हाँ, you do this, you do that. ये हमारे पुराणों में अभी बकवास. I mean, look, this is such a new disease that even doctors probably don't know what to do. Everybody has different opinions, okay? You remember HCQ, क्या गया HCQ? अब कहाँ है? Ivermectin, गया. Now it is remdesivir. And people are panicking. So even somebody who's moderately sick, and like you, sir, and like you, Barkha, are you running around trying to procure remdesivir? No, because you have used your head. Remdesivir is of no use to you. Except the fear is that when you do need it, you won't get it.
Yeah.
So everybody is living in fear. I'm living in fear because my wife has COVID. You are living in fear because you have COVID. Every one of us, sir, you too, are on the recovery path. Everybody is panicked because of the shortages. And this is something like, as you pointed out, sir, कि oxygen है, मैनेज नहीं हो रहा है, लॉजिस्टिकली मैनेज नहीं हो रहा है. और ये बकवास that it took them so much time to say industrial to medical oxygen. Actually, medical oxygen has a lower purity standard than industrial oxygen. So, and this is not something they want to tell the public, oh, we have taken a decision to convert industrial to... अबे ये कोई सोचने की बात है? ये पहले दिन कर देना चाहिए था। नहीं जी, वो क्या है कि वो रैली करनी थी ना, इसलिए थोड़ा टाइम मिला नहीं। वो हम बंगाल जा रहे थे ना, बिना मास्क के, ये बोलने के लिए कि इतनी बड़ी क्राउड मैंने कभी नहीं देखी है। This is what our leadership was wasting time on. And yes, I'm not absolving, say, the Delhi government or any other government either. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, the Delhi government has done a stellar job. It has not. Okay? It's okay to say, they didn't let us work, they didn't let us work. यार देखो, ये टाइम नहीं है ये सब करने का। ये जान बचाने का टाइम है और कोशिश करने का टाइम है। बाद में लड़ते रहना, कोर्ट में आप लड़ते रहोगे, वहां बाहर लोग मर रहे हैं। सारे गवर्नमेंट, एक स्टेट केरल ने ऑक्सीजन मैनेज किया है, ठीक है, उनके केसेस आर थ्रू द रूफ, बट अगेन देयर डेथ्स एज अ रेशियो ऑफ केसेस इज स्टिल द लोएस्ट इन द कंट्री. Tamil Nadu apparently has not done a bad job in managing their oxygen. So it can be done, is the point, that if you wanted to do it, you could have done it.
Actually, we have an example from one district in Maharashtra, a tribal district, where a district collector decides to spend 85 lakh rupees of his government funds to build an oxygen plant in 2020. That's all he did, 85 lakh rupees. And he managed to, he has an oxygen surplus in his district. So if anyone thinks that this is not about governance, if anyone thinks this is about a second wave that kuch nahi ho sakta tha, that's absolute bullshit. But the court meanwhile slamming the center. But do we have time for all this? Ki bhai ye tankers hain, tanker yahan bhejiye. This is the situation we're in. The court every day telling the center how to distribute oxygen. We're seeing some of those statements. Let's come out of it. I want to bring in Patralekha. Patralekha, you've been covering health forever. Have you seen anything like this ever before?
Never. And, I've covered the AIDS epidemic right from the beginning, the early years, 1990s, the polio, and even actually conflicts in many countries. And I was just telling somebody right today that this is worse than covering a war in a way, because, in terms of personal risk, that in a war, at the most, you'll be dead. Here, not only you, but you could put your families at risk. And many medical doctors that I've been speaking to, say that this is their greatest source of strength. That when they go to the ward, even despite the masks and the shields and everything, this is what we feel. But coming to what you were discussing, about messaging, and I think the word the blind was mentioned. But I think it's also as if the governments, the key people in the government, including the Prime Minister, are living not only are they blind, but they're also deaf, right? It's like being in a soundproof room, where you shut out all the howls and the cries and everything from outside. And I feel when I watch, we are in lockdown, Delhi, many of us, it's like a split screen. It's dystopian, right? On one side, you're seeing these, families struggling for oxygen, their voices. On the other, as you mentioned, Central Vista, and these strange kind of statements, and they're just the sheer tone deafness of it. The premature celebrations, the triumphalism, which actually started, I think, from last year, but this year, it's been over the top. And it's not that there were no warnings. The government's own, the parliamentary committee, the standing committee has talked about the second wave. Now what I don't understand, and when the possibility of a second wave is flagged, is it that people right on the top forgot what our population is? 1.3 or 1.4 billion now. So the scale was never factored in. So when you know that there's going to be a second wave, this has been flagged, you assume that the best case scenario. And why is that? And again, I think it's the triumphalism. I was reading Chinmay Tumbe's book, The Age of Pandemics, where they said even the British learned, that premature celebrations never work. It never works in public health. Never. In the battle against polio, I don't think we went on prematurely celebrating. This whole triumphalism, we did it. This is the end game. It's almost like treating it like a race. This is a pandemic. It's going on. Even the countries which have done very, very well, no one is treating it like a race. Nobody is saying it's over, So I'm just shocked. The other day I even listened to, Assam Minister Hemant Sarma. He's saying, US and Israel have told their people not to wear masks. That's not true. There's lots of caveats over there. When you are a minister at that position and you do this kind of messaging, it's dangerous. And this whole
And that happened,
argument
and that not wearing masks outside happened after a large percentage of the population has been double vaccinated. We are simply not there.
Exactly.
Our elderly have not been able to get their scheduled second dose. Now, Rajeev, you had an unsuccessful attempt to stop this Central Vista. Not just were you not able to stop it in the courts of this country, the Central Vista Project carries through this crisis, through this broken-hearted nation's worst crisis. The Central Vista is considered an essential activity, Rajeev.
Yes, as unfortunate as it is to all of us, Barkha, in the first instance, we must lament having lost the huge battle that we actually fought in the Delhi courts, starting with the Delhi High Court and then it being pulled into the Supreme Court by the Supreme Court itself, and they taking over the reins there. And for me to speak anything about the direction of the court at this point in time may not be appropriate. But the way the country is, I leave a lot to your imagination for you to imagine that, this project was hugely flawed, extremely flawed. There were very, very many legal loopholes in it, which we had actually exploited. And just to correct you for a minute, Barkha, it wasn't one petition that I had filed, it was 5 petitions, and we had actually tried to go on to all the subjects possible, which is the environment clearance, change in land use, the heritage
But when you
aspect.
see it happening now, you lost that, fine. But now, there are people dying on the streets of shut hospitals and we are building a goddamn vanity project in the heart of the city.
So there you are. So this is the kind of government that we've elected, and this is the kind of government that we'll have to bear up to, unless and until we are willing to take a stronger stance in the future. And as you know, that all the institutions have been subverted to such an extent that if you go to the courts seeking justice, there's nothing more that can be said on that subject. And a time has come where I think we have ruined our institutions to such an extent to repair them again is going to be a formidable task, even if we get a government in the future that has some constitutional values, and they sort of try to make amends to this entire issue.
Madhavan, what do you make as someone who's observed politics and how politicians behave? It is true that when we talk about the carelessness in Bengal, all parties must be culpable. Rahul Gandhi was among the first to call off the campaign, but he also did it very late into the game. But the Prime Minister, as the main leader, should have led by example. There's no doubt about that. But what explains the one thing that everybody agreed on when it came to Modi was inko communicate karna aata hai. In fact, Sandip used to keep saying on our programs, why is the Prime Minister not taking charge of the communication? But it's almost as if, I don't know, they have decided to power through this phase. They have decided nothing can be done. Vaccines are not a way out of it. People are just going to die anyway. And I think they've just decided nothing can be done. There's almost a kind of brazen stubbornness that I'm sensing.
Barkha, I would first of all prefer Modi not to be discussed in a direct sense, because that's only going to take us into a mental trap in which you're walking into a worldview in which everybody is out to get him, and therefore it is just sheer frustration or criticism. As somebody who's covered ministries, I want to see this as an institutional problem. And it's very important to focus on that, because only then you will get a true diagnosis of what's going on. What has happened is the communication that you famously speak of applies only to a certain kind of mass communication of electoral or political significance. Communication involves a lot of interactivity at various levels, such as asking questions of bureaucrats, telling them what to do, having a sense of process in who will do what, why, when, and how. All that is being simply not part of the discourse right now, although Rama Baru and Rajeev Suri did mention that. We have to focus on why institutions have failed, while the famous...
So why have they?
Because what we are witnessing is an emergency-like situation in which the so-called steel frame has been silenced into abject submission. I want whistleblowers from the IAS speaking out against this government, because, or speaking out for the government. I don't mind that. What we need is a sense of detail. You've seen a creative apologist like Sandip Ghose, I've been watching him defend the Modi government in various forms, in ways that even those in the government cannot. But even today, he is very explicitly and articulately admitting failure. The important thing to remember is, don't focus on faces and slogans, because this is becoming too politicized, that it's being reduced to false equivalences. हाँ, इसने उस पर आरोप लगाया, उसने इस पर आरोप लगाया. Do you want the तू मैं kind of thing, or do you want a sense of precision? Yesterday on Twitter, I asked Derek O'Brien, I said, let's conduct a quiz on this whole pandemic management, because only then we will find out exactly what went wrong and well. Although we've got some nice hints from Rama Baru on exactly what might have gone wrong there. We have this government, if there is one way to describe this government has no concept of institutional literacy. In other words, it's like we are living in Shivaji's times or something, where the king wins the elections and tells others, and the courtiers oblige, and somehow everything works. Whereas actually we are living in modernity. The idea of modernity is alien to this government. It's very important to understand that, because although we might have had great Vedas and Vedanta and Upanishads and all, the fact is that, I have to get a bit philosophical here, but it's very important. For the past 300 years, the world has seen science evolve. The world has seen institutional democracy evolve. These two are very important aspects of an evolution of any society. It is a global phenomenon now. In Africa and Latin America, everywhere we are trying to...
So what's happening here?
Because here, this whole business of fighting colonial rule, or fighting those, even Congress party is seen as a post-colonial institution by the BJP. It's very important to understand that. So once they take this as post-colonial, they think this has to be opposed, even if it means opposing science, even if it opposes the ICS or IAS. It has no sense.
I understand. For modernity, I get that, but I just want to take your comments around the panel, because we're on limited time. Sandeep, as a supporter of the Prime Minister and as a supporter of the government, your biggest disappointment today is what?
My biggest disappointment are two things. One is nobody's getting a confidence that they really know what they're doing, or whether they're doing anything at all. And that's where we come to the issue of communication. I'm no longer harping on the fact of whether he should speak to the nation or what he should tell the nation. But communication, as Madhavan says, there is verbal and non-verbal also. So we are just getting some snippets of his meeting some experts or meeting other people. Now that doesn't mean a thing. People really want to have a visibility, and you might say, okay, these are things which are our problems. We're trying to overcome them. But then at least there is a direction and a vision which should be clear to people. Otherwise, how can anybody go to sleep at night, in that context? And what Rama is saying, what Madhavan is saying, you don't know whether this Dr. Paul, Harshvardhan, I'm not even discussing about, but who are the other experts who are there? Harshvardhan, as he's so tone deaf. In the midst of everything, yesterday he tweets congratulating the Prime Minister for election victories, when there has been a major setback in West Bengal, forgetting that. Are you trying to please the Prime Minister, congratulating him for fantastic election victories? Is that what you do right now as the Health Minister? So it is, therefore, it's totally, I'm told Amit Shah is chairing the task force or a group, and so he has also gone in total silence ever since he came back from Bengal. So it's, as you said, it's anybody's guess.
It's that Daljit Singh, a man who died at the Shamshan Ghat. His brother told me, "Hum to ji Bhagwan bharose." For those who believe in God, for those who feel that even God has abandoned them, there is absolute desolation. Patralekha, you want to talk about the growing, mounting fear, the breakdown in the compact between citizen and state, because that's really what this is about.
Yes, I think,
Patralekha, unmute
months
yourself.
ago. But
Yeah.
yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So I think can you hear me now? Yeah? Can you hear me?
Yes, please
Yes,
speak.
yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think what is, through all this that I'm hearing, one word we haven't mentioned is actually fear. Because it's not that the bureaucrats have changed overnight. Yes, that there are a few handpicked bureaucrats, they've been put on top. But, the main thing is, why don't people talk? Why don't people speak up? All these experts. And, talking to people within, the inside circle, I think it's this terror, it's the fear. Because I think, all of us, journalists, and as you said, I've been, writing forever on health, we've all criticized governments and we've done that. And yes, at the most, we lost access. But we didn't live in fear. Now there is fear, and only maybe if you're very, very famous, something may not happen to you. So I think in the bureaucracy, what you sense is people are terrified of speaking up. If there's I think recently we had this bunch of scientists speaking out, and they said they wanted to put their stuff on record. But it was interesting that they chose to speak in a collective voice, because it's very, very, it's this government particularly, it doesn't, it can, I think there's a fear of what can happen to you. When that happens, a lot of experts, especially within the system, will bow down, and they won't speak up. That is what is happening. It's a fear, whether it's the media, whether it's anything.
We treat this government as this behemoth, this all-powerful thing, but actually the incompetence has been staggering. The incompetence in not purchasing vaccines, the incompetence in having foreign aid lie at the airports since the 25th of April without an SOP to distribute it and to send it to states. Madhavan, a brief interjection, then Rahul, and then Dr. Rama Baru. Madhavan, very briefly, please.
I would like to point out the fact that the Election Commission went to the High Court against people venting their frustrations. Is this the Election Commission's job? So essentially, we are looking at a place where the courts and the institutions instead of working in tandem for the welfare of the people are now being used to settle scores and that kind of frustrations there. The other thing, there is a pattern to this, whether it's the Kumbh Mela or the election rallies or IPL right now, they are waiting for problems to show up before putting in some band-aid kind of a ban or lockdown or anything. Nobody is taking things into their own hands. And the only way out for this is for a clear set of processes of the kind you mentioned just now, whether it's foreign aid or whether it is vaccines or anything. Have a very clear sense of processes and ask the right questions. But right now, what is happening is that there is a fear psychosis within the government, which is reminiscent of the emergency, which basically means that nobody can come out and ask questions or seek facts or even contradict each other.
So here's what we know. Here's what we know now. Dr. Shahid Jameel, who's one of the most respected virologists of this country, said to me earlier today, vaccines are no longer a way out of the second wave. It's too late. It is too late. So the only thing that we can do right now is to try and save some lives. And the only way lives can be saved is with an oxygen supply. And it's going to take a few weeks even for that to stabilize. So we're actually looking at living through this carnage. And the fact that the government continues to not hold files on Central Vista projects or where the Prime Minister's new residence is going to be or the Vice President's new residence is going to be is something so unreal to me that I don't even have words to describe it. Rahul, if you're wanting to come in on this, I mean, your satirist troupe, Aisi Taisi Democracy, could not have written this if you tried. Can we unmute Rahul, please? Yeah.
Oops. Yeah. I think nobody could have predicted. To be a little bit, I would say that the extent of the second wave has taken everybody by surprise. I don't think any one of us could have predicted this. Add to it the fact that definitely cases and deaths are being undercounted by a huge, And so that makes what you were saying even more relevant, is that vaccines are not going to help. अब जो जैसा है भैया खुद अपने आप कर दो, मर गए तो मर गए, भूल जाओ. Make yourself safe, and because the government is, what will they do? They've kind of pushed themselves into a situation and they're incapable of ever admitting to a mistake ever. Have you ever heard this government say they've made a mistake? No.
Yeah.
I mean, demonetization Was it wrong? No, even today they're saying, yeah, demonetized, बहुत अच्छा था. कुछ भी गलती मानने की क्षमता नहीं है इन लोगों में, क्योंकि मेरे ख्याल जो कैरेक्टर है सरकार का वो ऐसा है कि हमसे गलती नहीं होती. ठीक है बेटे, अब तुम झेल लो. ये है सरकार. और मैंने एक गाना बनाया था, वो मैं अभी नहीं गाऊंगा. बनाया था मैंने, बाद में, अभी टाइम नहीं है.
Do you think more people, Rahul, are feeling anger or desolation?
You know, just yesterday I was talking to a bhakt who's still a bhakt. You think, क्या हो गया? हैं? क्या हो गया? कुछ भी तो नहीं हुआ. कुछ भी तो नहीं हुआ. सब कुछ मोदी संभालेगा. सब कुछ मोदी संभालेगा. हम लोगों को संभालना पड़ेगा. So you know, जो एंगर, मुझे जैसे यूपी में क्या हो रहा है, अगर आप यूपी के पंचायत इलेक्शन के रिजल्ट देखोगे आपको समझ आएगा कि थोड़ी बहुत एंगर आ गई है ग्राउंड लेवल पे. It's insane. I mean, even people, finally this has reached everywhere, and I'm hoping that this anger translates into some sense of responsibility on the part of the sarkar. But as far as saving lives is concerned, I think it's a bit too late for that.
Yeah, I think that's where we are. Rajeev, and before I give Rama the last word, Rajeev.
Barkha, you know, sorry, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Barkha, what I'd like to say is that as a country, we've reached an inflection point. You see, things have gone from bad to worse, and for a period of 7 years, we've all sat by and been mute spectators, or we've been silenced into being silent and not speaking up. And unfortunately, people who did have a little bit of courage to speak up were treated the way they've been treated, as all of us know, and cases slapped on them, and the various institutions, set out the income tax and the ED, etc., set out after them. So therefore, that was a limited number of people, but now it seems to be getting widespread, and we find that it's the anger is not just confined to those few people, but to a larger majority. And so I would speak with a little bit of very, very cautious optimism that we may be reaching a period in our history where we may see an inflection, a change in governance, and a regime change in time to come. The only missing link in this entire thing is that the opposition has to ramp itself up, and the Bengal elections has been a big boost in this. And let's see how things shape up, because
I just want to jump in there and say to Madhavan's point that if we make this too much about what the political consequences are, I think we are actually having a self-defeating conversation. How does it matter? It matters today to save lives. It doesn't matter to me whether Modi wins or Mamta wins. I really don't give a shit. I care that people's lives are saved, right? And I think that there is where we fall into a familiar trap. Madhavan, very briefly, and I have to close with Rama then. Madhavan ko unmute kariye, please. Yeah.
It's in administration. That is the first thing we need to do, so that any obligation or accountability of the government has to be done through facts and figures and processes, and not through general rhetorical political criticism, because that only gives a Teflon coating to the government. That only makes worse things instead of better. The other thing is, I just heard General Huda say that the army can still handle the situation. If necessary, let us respect that institution called the army, and because they can do wonders, because they have a sense of discipline and organization. If more lives can be saved by somehow bringing in the army.
But I'll tell you, I had the army generals on yesterday, and they told me that the DRDO has handed them skeletal shelters without oxygen, drugs, or staff. So they're saying कि field hospital तो हमें बनाना आता है, लेकिन supplies नहीं हम generate कर सकते. This issue of supplies, the supply chain is broken. The crisis in the country right now is that the supply chain is broken.
Let's begin somewhere with this sense of respect for any institution that still works.
Of course.
Simple as that.
I have been calling for the army to be deployed to make field hospitals at the borders of major cities for the last 3 weeks. Field hospitals that were dismantled in 2020. You need them. Why were they dismantled? Among the many fatal errors that were made from last year. And the army has some experience of running field hospitals in war zones. It may well have to be deployed to do something similar, out at the borders as smaller towns. By the way, we don't even know what's going to happen in some of these smaller towns right now. We're only dealing with what's happening in the metropolitan cities. Rama Baru, close this for us. Last word to you. Can we unmute her, please? Yeah.
No, I think there is a very, very important message here of complete breakdown of governance. If Modi was elected with the great pride of being this man who could govern this country efficiently, that has just been completely demystified. I think the fact that you can't, after this terrible pandemic, you're not able to get supply chains organized. I mean, that's not rocket science, for God's sake. You have enough expertise. You have expertise in the government. You have expertise in the private sector. This government has no compunction dealing with the private sector. Then why didn't you rope in people who would help you to do supply chain management, to do an emergency response to a crisis? Somewhere I really feel, Barkha, they don't give a damn. They just don't give a damn. They're going to brazen this out. They're going to let people die. They have no compunction. They have no moral responsibility. It is that state of very, very sad affairs. And they're not going to listen to anybody who is going to speak in a different voice. Either you're with them or you're not with them. That is the bottom line.
Well, I think that if they were to go and meet the people outside the closed doors of hospitals at crematorium grounds where there is no place left for people to cremate their dead, being a person of privilege, when we went to cremate my father, we had to seek police protection from Gurgaon police because there was a fight at the cremation ground. This is us with our access to resources, to knowing people, to being able to call a police officer. आप गरीब आदमी से बात करके देखिए जो किसी को नहीं जानता है, जो एक टोकन लेके पूरा दिन सुबह से शाम, जिसके पास अंतिम संस्कार के लिए लकड़ी देने के लिए पैसे नहीं है, एम्बुलेंस को पैसे देने के लिए 5,000 रुपए नहीं है. There are people who have been orphaned literally, but there are orphans of the Indian state. And I don't know if the government has decided to brazen it out, but I hope that the people make themselves heard. I don't care about electoral consequences, but I do care about saving lives. And I think that's where our attention needs to be. But it's a grim situation, and we have nothing very hopeful to say at the end of this program, except to say thank you. And to our audience, we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you to our panel. We'll keep an eye on this emerging crisis in our country. Thank you for being part of our conversation. We will see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.